The courtroom sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. At the center of this charged atmosphere was Jason Miller, the 17-year-old juvenile defendant whose actions had shattered a community and now brought him face to face with the gravest consequence the legal system could impose. The teenager's faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered briefly as he caught the eye of his lawyer, a gesture that seemed incongruous against the gravity of the death penalty deliberations underway. It was a momentary glimpse of composure, a fragile mask that belied the turmoil beneath. Before we delve into this heart-wrenching case, we invite you to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Please share in the comments your thoughts on the complexities surrounding juvenile justice. Your engagement fuels our mission to bring these impactful stories to light. The judge's gavel struck with measured authority, calling the courtroom to order, but the tension remained palpable. Every eye was fixed intently on the young man, whose youthful features contrasted starkly with the severity of the charges arrayed against him. Jason's posture was rigid, his hands clenched tightly on the defense table. The prolonged silence was finally broken when his lawyer cleared her throat and leaned forward, whispering counsel that went unnoticed by all but her client. For a brief moment, Jason's stoicism began to crack. As the proceedings commenced, the district attorney outlined the case's somber outline, but it was the emotional gravity in the room that captured the unspoken reality. This was no ordinary trial. The teenager sat in the defendant's chair, not merely as an accused, but as a symbol of a broader societal struggle with youth violence and the limits of justice. The courtroom tension was not simply legal, it was profoundly human. The defense attorney's strategy was immediately apparent in her opening remarks. She painted a portrait of a troubled adolescent, one whose actions, while inexcusable, stemmed from a nexus of psychological trauma and environmental factors. Yet, even as she spoke, the undercurrent of the prosecution's counter-arguments loomed large, a premeditated shooting with devastating consequences, demanding accountability beyond mitigating circumstances. Throughout the hearing, Jason's demeanor oscillated subtly. At times, he maintained a steady gaze toward his lawyer, drawing strength or perhaps reassurance from her presence. At others, his eyes drifted toward the gallery, where families of the victims sat, their faces etched with grief and fury. The dichotomy between the teenager's outward composure and the brutal reality of his actions created a complex psychological portrait, one that the court would endeavor to unravel in painstaking detail. Minutes stretched into hours as witness after witness took the stand, each testimony layering nuance onto the unfolding narrative. Yet it was during the victim impact statements that the fragile veneer shielding Jason's emotions began to erode. As family members recounted the profound losses and irreversible pain inflicted by the shooting, the teenager's stoic facade faltered. His shoulders sagged. A tremor passed through him. The courtroom tension intensified as a solitary tear traced a path down his cheek, marking a moment of raw human vulnerability amidst the clinical proceedings. This emotional breakdown was not lost on the jury, nor on the legal teams. The prosecution viewed it through a lens of skepticism, wary that it might be a calculated display. Conversely, the defense seized upon this moment as evidence of genuine remorse and the potential for rehabilitation. challenging the notion that the juvenile defendant was beyond redemption. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere mirrored the internal tumult. News crews gathered, their cameras capturing the somber faces of those affected, while community members grappled with a melange of emotions: grief, anger, confusion, and a desperate search for answers. The teenager's fleeting smile and subsequent breakdown became emblematic of the case's complexity, sparking debates about the interplay between youthful impulse and legal responsibility. The prosecutor addressed the court with measured resolve, emphasizing that the death penalty deliberations were not merely punitive, but necessary to affirm justice for the victims and their families. His voice carried the weight of the community's demand for accountability, underscored by the premeditated nature of the shooting, a calculated act that shattered lives and upended a once peaceful high school. In contrast, the defense attorney's tone was solemn yet resolute, advocating for a nuanced understanding of juvenile psychology and the potential for reform. She argued that Jason's youth and mental health history warranted clemency, suggesting that the courtroom tension was exacerbated by the state's pursuit of the ultimate punishment against a boy still shaped by his environment and experiences. Throughout the hearing, the jury remained attentive, their expressions inscrutable as they absorbed the conflicting narratives. The courtroom became a stage where legal principles, moral considerations, and psychological complexities converged. Each moment was laden with significance, every gesture subject to scrutiny. Jason's moments of silence were punctuated by occasional whispered exchanges with his lawyer, a dynamic that revealed the delicate balance between legal strategy and human connection. His faint smile upon meeting her gaze earlier had been a brief respite from the overwhelming pressure, a glimpse of the teenager behind the charges. As proceedings continued, the defense team prepared to present expert testimony on adolescent brain development and mental health disorders, seeking to contextualize Jason's actions within a framework of diminished capacity. The prosecution, meanwhile, assembled a meticulous case underscoring premeditation, cold calculation, and the irrevocable consequences of the shooting. The judge's admonitions and procedural commands maintained order, yet the emotional undercurrents persisted, casting a shadow over the sterile courtroom environment. The tension was not merely between prosecution and defense, but permeated the collective consciousness of all present. In a poignant exchange, the defense attorney quietly reminded Jason of the importance of honesty and openness in court, to which he responded with a nod, though his eyes remained distant. This interaction underscored the chasm between the teenager's internal struggle and the external demands of the legal process. As the day's hearing drew to a close, the young defendant's composure waned further. The cumulative weight of testimony, public scrutiny, and the looming specter of the death penalty culminated in a visible moment of vulnerability. He lowered his head, his breath hitching slightly, a silent testament to the profound psychological toll exacted by the trial. The courtroom tension, palpable since the opening moments, now seemed to coalesce into a shared, if unspoken, recognition of the tragedy unfolding before all eyes. Jason Miller was no longer just the teenager charged with a premeditated shooting. He was a symbol of the fraught intersection between juvenile justice, mental health, and societal responsibility. As spectators filed out, their murmurs filled the hallways, reflecting the deep divisions and complex emotions stirred by the case. The faint smile that had briefly illuminated Jason's face earlier was now replaced by a somber stillness, a prelude to the arduous legal journey yet to come. The early morning of October 14th had begun like any other at Westbrook High School, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the hum of routine masked the storm about to unfold. Students streamed through the halls, laughter and chatter filling the air, unaware that within minutes their lives would be irrevocably changed. At precisely 8:15 a.m., Jason Miller entered the building, carrying a concealed firearm beneath his jacket, a weapon that would soon unleash chaos. Eyewitnesses later recounted the harrowing moments that followed, their testimonies painting a vivid, fractured mosaic of terror and confusion. Several students described hearing a sudden, sharp crack, a sound that shattered the morning calm and sent bodies scattering in all directions. Panic rippled through the corridors as Jason fired indiscriminately, his actions a calculated yet frenzied assault on his peers. One student, Sarah Collins, a sophomore, recalled the moment with trembling voice. "It was like the world stopped. I saw him raise the gun, and then the shots just kept coming. People were screaming, ducking behind lockers, trying to find cover. I thought I was going to die." Within seconds, the school's emergency alarm blared, its piercing wail echoing through the hallways, signaling the unfolding crisis. Teachers swiftly moved to secure classrooms, locking doors and ushering students to safety. But the damage had already been done. Multiple students sustained gunshot wounds, their cries piercing the chaotic din as first responders rushed to the scene. Law enforcement arrived promptly, their presence both a source of reassurance and tension. Officers navigated the labyrinthine corridors with weapons drawn, searching for the assailant who had already fled the immediate area. The school was placed on lockdown, parents and relatives anxiously awaiting news outside the perimeter, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. The shooting lasted barely 5 minutes, yet the aftermath reverberated through the community with enduring impact. Emergency medical teams triaged and transported the wounded to nearby hospitals, while detectives began the painstaking process of securing the crime scene and gathering evidence. Witnesses were interviewed amidst the turmoil, their accounts crucial in piecing together the sequence of events. Surveillance footage from the school's security system captured fragmented images of Jason moving through the hallways, his demeanor cold and focused. Investigators noted the deliberate route he took, targeting crowded areas to maximize harm. The premeditated nature of the attack became evident through these visuals, underscoring the gravity of the charges to come. At the scene, forensic teams meticulously documented ballistic evidence, spent shell casings, bullet trajectories, and impact points, each detail contributing to the reconstruction of the shooting timeline. The collected data would later prove instrumental in corroborating witness statements and establishing the extent of the injuries inflicted. The victims, ranging in age from 14 to 17, were transported under emergency conditions, some in critical state. Hospital staff mobilized swiftly to provide life-saving interventions, their efforts a stark contrast to the senseless violence that had brought so many young lives to the brink. The community held its collective breath, praying for recovery, even as the scope of the tragedy became clearer. Amidst the turmoil, Jason Miller was apprehended less than an hour after the attack, found hiding in a nearby abandoned warehouse. His arrest was swift and uneventful, the teenager offering no resistance as officers read him his rights. His expression was reportedly blank, an unsettling calm that hinted at a chilling detachment from the mayhem he had wrought. The immediate aftermath saw a surge of activity from law enforcement agencies and emergency responders, all coordinated to manage the crisis and begin the investigative process. The school was closed for several days, its corridors now silent witnesses to the violence that had transpired. Counselors and crisis intervention teams were dispatched to support survivors and staff, recognizing the profound psychological trauma inflicted. Community leaders convened emergency meetings, grappling with the shock and searching for avenues of healing and prevention. Vigils were held, drawing hundreds who mourned the injured and honored those who had narrowly escaped death. The shooting became a defining moment for the town, exposing vulnerabilities and igniting urgent calls for change. Law enforcement officials released preliminary statements to the press, confirming the number of injured and assuring the public of ongoing investigations. They emphasized the bravery of first responders and the resilience of the community, even as the scars of the incident remained fresh. The timeline of the attack was reconstructed with painstaking detail. At 8:15 a.m., Jason entered the main corridor armed with a semi-automatic handgun. Within the next 2 minutes, he discharged multiple rounds, targeting clusters of students in the hallways and near classroom entrances. By 8:20 a.m., he had exited the building, disappearing into the adjacent neighborhood before his capture. Witnesses' descriptions varied, but a consistent picture emerged. Jason acted with calculated intent, his movements deliberate rather than impulsive. Several students noted his expression was void of emotion, a stark contrast to the chaos he instigated. This observation would later become a focal point in psychological evaluations. The response protocols executed by Westbrook High's staff were lauded for their efficiency, preventing further casualties. Teachers had rehearsed lockdown drills regularly, and their swift actions undoubtedly saved lives. Yet, the incident exposed gaps in school security measures, prompting administrative reviews and policy discussions. Emergency medical personnel recounted the harrowing scenes within the school, describing corridors stained with blood and the desperate efforts to stabilize the wounded. The trauma extended beyond physical injuries, as survivors grappled with shock and fear that would linger long after the immediate threat dissipated. Parents, grappling with uncertainty, flooded the school with frantic calls and messages, desperate for information. The emotional toll on families was profound, compounded by conflicting reports and media speculation. Authorities worked to provide timely updates, balancing transparency with sensitivity. The shooting's ripple effects extended into the wider community. Local businesses closed temporarily, and neighborhood residents expressed a mixture of sorrow and outrage. Faith leaders organized prayer services, while advocacy groups began mobilizing for stricter gun control measures and enhanced mental health resources. In the days following the attack, investigations intensified. Police canvassed the area around the school, collecting additional evidence and interviewing witnesses who had initially been too traumatized to speak. The discovery of a manifesto and related social media activity linked to Jason Miller would later shed light on his mindset. But at this initial stage, the focus remained on securing facts. Law enforcement's rapid identification and apprehension of the suspect underscored the effectiveness of interagency cooperation. The teenager was transported to the county detention center, where he awaited formal charges. His arrest marked the beginning of a complex legal and psychological inquiry into the motives behind the shooting. The community's collective psyche was shattered. Schools across the district implemented heightened security measures, and conversations about safety protocols became urgent and widespread. Parents debated the adequacy of existing safeguards, while educators faced the daunting task of restoring a sense of normalcy for their students. Media coverage was extensive and continuous, with reporters providing live updates from the scene and interviews with survivors and officials. The narrative quickly expanded beyond the immediate facts, exploring themes of youth violence, gun access, and mental health awareness. The shooting at Westbrook High became a national story, emblematic of a larger epidemic. In the midst of this upheaval, the victims' identities emerged. Teenagers with promising futures, their lives irrevocably altered or ended by the single act of violence. Families grappled with grief and anger, their stories humanizing the statistics and fueling demands for justice. Jason Miller's role in the shooting was soon framed not only by the physical evidence, but also by the testimonies of those who witnessed the attack firsthand. Their accounts described a calculated assailant, methodically targeting peers with a chilling detachment. This portrayal would become central to the prosecution's narrative in subsequent legal proceedings. The chaotic crime scene was gradually transformed into a repository of forensic clues. Ballistics experts matched recovered shell casings to the weapon found on Jason, confirming his sole responsibility. Surveillance videos corroborated eyewitness testimonies, creating an incontrovertible timeline. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement maintained a delicate balance, pursuing the facts with rigor while attempting to honor the dignity of the victims and the community's pain. The intensity of public scrutiny added complexity as officials navigated the pressures inherent in such a high-profile case. The shooting at Westbrook High was not merely an isolated act of violence. It was a catalyst that exposed systemic vulnerabilities and invoked urgent questions about prevention, intervention, and justice. The incident would reverberate through every facet of the ensuing trial, shaping the discourse around juvenile offenders and the death penalty deliberations that awaited Jason Miller. The aftermath of the Westbrook High shooting rippled far beyond the sterile confines of the courtroom and crime scene, seeping into the lives of the victims and the tightly knit community they called home. Families, once bound by ordinary routines, were thrust into a maelstrom of grief, fear, and anger, a collective trauma that would define their existence in the months and years to come. Among the injured was Emily Hartman, a bright and vivacious 16-year-old whose dreams were abruptly interrupted by a bullet lodged near her spine. Confined to a hospital bed for weeks, Emily's family described her as a beacon of resilience. Yet beneath her determined smile lay the physical and psychological scars of that harrowing day. Her mother, Karen Hartman, spoke in quiet, strained tones during a press conference. "We're grateful she survived, but no family should endure this nightmare. Our lives are forever changed." The fatalities, tragically, cast a long shadow over the community. Lucas Ramirez, a 17-year-old senior known for his athleticism and kindness, was among those who succumbed to their injuries. His father, Javier Ramirez, addressed the courtroom during victim impact statements, his voice heavy with sorrow. Lucas was more than a victim. He was a son, a friend, a future that was stolen. No sentence can bring him back, but justice must be served. The family's grief was palpable, the courtroom often echoing with tears and anguished pleas. Each testimony added layers of human complexity to the proceedings, shifting the focus from abstract legal arguments to the tangible cost of violence. The dichotomy between the youth of the victims and the gravity of their loss underscored the profound tragedy at the heart of the case. Community leaders mobilized swiftly, recognizing the urgent need to support those affected. Local schools organized counseling sessions and memorial services, creating spaces for collective mourning and healing. The principal of Westbrook High, Dr. Helen Monroe, described the efforts as essential. Our priority is to nurture a safe environment where students and families can begin to process this trauma together. Beyond institutional responses, grassroots initiatives emerged as powerful forces of solidarity. Neighborhood vigils attracted hundreds, their flickering candlelight a somber testament to lives disrupted and futures lost. Survivors and their families found solace in shared experience, forging bonds that transcended the immediate pain. The community's reaction was not limited to mourning. It also sparked a widespread call to action. Parents, educators, and activists united in demanding comprehensive reforms addressing school security, mental health services, and gun control. Town hall meetings swelled with impassioned voices, debates charged with urgency and frustration. The shooting had shattered more than bodies. It had fractured a collective sense of safety. In the media, narratives oscillated between empathy for the victims and scrutiny of the system's failures. Local newspapers devoted extensive coverage to personal stories, humanizing those affected while highlighting the systemic issues. Editorials called for policy changes, emphasizing prevention and early intervention as critical components in averting future tragedies. The student body at Westbrook High grappled with complex emotions. Survivors navigated a labyrinth of trauma, guilt, and survivor's remorse. Counselors reported increased incidences of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder among students. Peer support groups became vital, offering a confidential forum for expression and healing. The victims' families often found themselves thrust into the public eye, their privacy sacrificed to the demands of a high-profile case. Many expressed frustration at the intrusion, yet they remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice. Their presence in the courtroom was a poignant reminder of the human faces behind the legal abstractions. School staff, too, bore the weight of the tragedy. Teachers who had witnessed the shooting firsthand struggled with their own emotional responses while striving to provide stability for students. Some took leaves of absence, others returned with renewed commitment, determined to honor the memory of those lost through dedication to their roles. The community's efforts to heal were complicated by deep divisions regarding the legal proceedings, particularly the death penalty deliberations. While many advocated for the harshest punishment as a form of justice, others raised concerns about the appropriateness of capital punishment for a juvenile defendant. These debates often unfolded in public forums, reflecting the broader societal tensions surrounding youth crime and punishment. Mental health professionals involved in post-incident support emphasize the importance of addressing underlying issues. Dr. Marcus Lee, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma, noted, "The community is grappling not only with the immediate aftermath, but with the long-term psychological impacts. Comprehensive services are essential to prevent further harm. Religious and spiritual leaders played a significant role in guiding communal mourning and offering comfort. Interfaith services underscored themes of forgiveness, resilience, and hope, even amidst profound loss. Their presence provided a moral framework within which the community could process the tragedy. The victims' stories were marked by their individuality and promise. Lucas Ramirez had been preparing to attend college on a sports scholarship. Emily Hartman was an aspiring artist. Their interrupted trajectories became symbolic of the broader stakes involved in the case, a stark illustration of lives cut short or irrevocably altered. Memorials and tributes proliferated throughout the town. A mural painted on the school's exterior wall depicted the faces of the victims, accompanied by messages of remembrance and resolve. Annual events were established to honor their memory and promote awareness of school safety and mental health. The community's response also included practical initiatives aimed at prevention. Workshops on conflict resolution, anti-bullying campaigns, and mental health education became integral parts of school programming. Local government allocated funds for security enhancements, including surveillance systems and increased personnel. Yet, beneath these efforts lay an undercurrent of unresolved pain and anger. Some families expressed dissatisfaction with the pace of legal proceedings and the perceived inadequacies of support services. Tensions occasionally surfaced at public meetings, reflecting the emotional volatility surrounding the case. The dichotomy between resilience and vulnerability permeated the community's narrative. While many strove to rebuild and move forward, the shadow of the shooting lingered, a constant reminder of fragility and loss. The collective psyche bore the imprint of trauma, shaping discourse and identity. In the courtroom, the presence of the victims' families served as a poignant counterbalance to the legal arguments presented. Their testimonies, often delivered with trembling voices, bridged the gap between abstract jurisprudence and lived experience. The emotional weight of their statements contributed to the courtroom tension, influencing perceptions and deliberations. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some expressed unwavering support for the families and a desire for the harshest possible sentence. Others advocated for rehabilitation and questioned the efficacy and morality of the death penalty, especially for a juvenile defendant. These conflicting views underscored the complex ethical landscape navigated by the court. Media portrayal of the victims emphasized their humanity, countering any narrative that might reduce them to mere statistics. Profiles highlighted their achievements, personalities, and aspirations, fostering empathy and a deeper understanding of loss. Survivors' voices emerged as crucial elements in the ongoing dialogue. Some chose to speak publicly, advocating for change and sharing their experiences to prevent similar tragedies. Their courage added a layer of hope amidst sorrow, suggesting pathways toward healing and reform. The community's multifaceted response revealed the intricate interplay between individual grief and collective resilience. It underscored the necessity of comprehensive support systems and the challenges inherent in addressing trauma on such a scale. As the trial progressed, the stories of the victims and their families remained central, anchoring the legal process in the human realities it sought to address. Their presence, both literal and symbolic, ensured that the courtroom tension was imbued with profound emotional significance. In this way, the victims' narratives transcended their immediate tragedy, becoming catalysts for reflection, debate, and ultimately, a striving for justice that acknowledged both the depth of loss and the complexities of accountability. Jason Miller's personal history unfolded as a complex tapestry interwoven with familial strife, academic challenges, and psychological disturbances, elements that would later become focal points in understanding the motivations underpinning the shooting. Born into a fractured household, Jason's upbringing was marked by instability and neglect, factors that contributed to his increasing social isolation during formative years. From early childhood, Jason exhibited signs of behavioral difficulties. School records revealed multiple disciplinary incidents, ranging from verbal altercations to more serious confrontations with peers and staff. Teachers frequently noted his withdrawal and erratic mood swings, often attributing these behaviors to underlying emotional distress. Counselors who attempted interventions described a boy struggling to find his place, hampered by communication barriers and a pervasive sense of alienation. Family dynamics offered further insight into Jason's troubled development. His parents' tumultuous relationship culminated in separation when he was 11, a fracture that exacerbated existing emotional wounds. Living primarily with his mother, Jason's home environment was characterized by sporadic supervision and economic hardship. Reports from social workers indicated inconsistent parental engagement, with periods of neglect that left him vulnerable to negative influences. Mental health evaluations conducted during his adolescence suggested the presence of depressive episodes and emerging symptoms consistent with a mood disorder. Despite recommendations for therapeutic intervention, Jason's compliance was irregular, hampered by a combination of stigma, limited resources, and personal resistance. School counselors observed signs of escalating despair, including withdrawal from extracurricular activities and a decline in academic performance. Peers described Jason as an enigmatic figure, often silent, rarely participating in social gatherings, and sometimes displaying hostility. When provoked, his isolation appeared self-imposed, yet was compounded by rumors and instances of bullying, further marginalizing him within the school community. This social alienation became a recurring theme in psychological assessments, highlighting the interplay between external rejection and internal turmoil. Further scrutiny revealed a pattern of fascination with violent media and weaponry, which some experts interpreted as an outlet for unresolved anger and a maladaptive coping mechanism. Teachers and classmates recounted instances where Jason expressed morbid curiosity about past school shootings, a disturbing fixation that hinted at deeper psychological unrest. The discovery of a handwritten manifesto in Jason's possession provided a rare glimpse into his internal landscape. The document, replete with fragmented thoughts and ominous reflections, revealed a mind grappling with feelings of insignificance, resentment, and a yearning for recognition. Analysts noted references to perceived injustices and a desire to assert control in a world he felt had marginalized him. Social media activity further illuminated Jason's mental state in the months preceding the shooting. Posts oscillated between cryptic expressions of despair and veiled threats, often couched in language suggestive of isolation and anger. These digital footprints were scrutinized extensively during the investigation, offering both context and evidence of premeditation. Despite these warning signs, attempts to provide early intervention were sporadic and ultimately ineffective. Teachers who raised concerns to school administrators were met with limited responses, constrained by systemic inadequacies and resource limitations. The failure to connect Jason with consistent mental health support emerged as a critical factor in the broader narrative of missed opportunities. Psychologists involved in the case emphasized the importance of understanding Jason's developmental trajectory within the framework of adolescent brain development. They highlighted the impulsivity and emotional volatility characteristic of this stage, compounded in his case by untreated mental health issues and environmental stressors. Interviews conducted with family members painted a portrait of a boy struggling beneath the weight of expectations and personal demons. His mother described him as a child who wanted to be seen but didn't know how to ask for help, a sentiment echoed by former teachers who lamented the absence of effective communication channels. The juxtaposition between Jason's outward demeanor and the inner turmoil revealed by psychological profiles underscored the complexity of his character. While he often presented as detached and unemotional, assessments indicated significant distress and a capacity for remorse, factors that would later influence legal arguments regarding his culpability. Educational records illustrated a steady decline in grades, culminating in academic probation and eventual withdrawal from several courses. Disciplinary reports detailed episodes of defiance and absenteeism, symptomatic of a disengagement that paralleled his social withdrawal. Counselors attempted to implement individualized support plans, though success was limited by Jason's reluctance to participate. The influence of peer relationships, or lack thereof, was a significant element in Jason's psychological profile. Isolated from positive social networks, he became susceptible to negative influences, including online communities that reinforced his sense of alienation and validated violent ideations. This virtual environment provided both a refuge and a catalyst for his escalating grievances. Family history also revealed incidences of mental illness, suggesting a possible genetic predisposition. However, the interplay between hereditary factors and environmental stressors complicated any simplistic interpretation. The cumulative effect of neglect, trauma, and social rejection created a volatile psychological landscape. Jason's personal writings, including journal entries and notes found during the investigation, conveyed a narrative of escalating despair and a growing obsession with notions of revenge and notoriety. These documents were instrumental in constructing a psychological timeline that demonstrated increasing premeditation. The defense team would later leverage this intricate psychological portrait to argue for diminished responsibility, emphasizing Jason's youth and mental health struggles. Their expert witnesses detailed the impact of untreated depression, trauma, and adolescent neurodevelopment on decision-making processes, painting a picture of a juvenile defendant caught in a tempest of internal and external adversities. Conversely, the prosecution challenged these interpretations, underscoring the deliberate nature of the attack and the extensive planning evidenced by the manifesto and digital communications. They argued that despite psychological complexities, Jason's actions were calculated and driven by intent rather than impulse. Throughout the legal proceedings, the tension between these perspectives heightened, reflecting broader societal debates about juvenile justice and the capacity for rehabilitation. Jason's personal history became a central battleground for competing narratives, one seeking to humanize and contextualize, the other demanding accountability and retribution. Interpersonal dynamics within Jason's family also came under scrutiny. Testimonies revealed strained relationships, particularly between Jason and his father, marked by conflict and emotional distance. These factors, alongside reports of domestic instability, contributed to an environment lacking consistent support. Mental health professionals highlighted the significance of early detection and intervention, lamenting missed opportunities that might have altered Jason's trajectory. Their analyses emphasized the need for systemic reforms to better identify and assist at-risk youth. The interplay of academic failure, social isolation, and psychological distress created a feedback loop that intensified Jason's alienation. Schools, families, and community systems each bore partial responsibility for the failure to interrupt this downward spiral. In sum, Jason Miller's personal history was characterized by a confluence of adverse factors: family dysfunction, untreated mental illness, social marginalization, and academic decline that coalesced to form a psychological profile marked by vulnerability and volatility. This multifaceted background set the stage for the tragic events that followed and provided a crucial context for understanding his actions within the judicial process. The investigation into the Westbrook High shooting unfolded with meticulous precision as law enforcement and forensic experts worked tirelessly to assemble a comprehensive evidentiary framework that would withstand the rigors of trial. The initial crime scene, chaotic and fraught with trauma, was transformed into a methodical tableau of forensic inquiry, each detail scrutinized, every fragment of evidence cataloged with painstaking care. Ballistic analysis formed a cornerstone of the investigation. Forensic teams recovered multiple spent shell casings from the hallways and classrooms, their positions mapped to establish the shooter's trajectory and firing patterns. The semi-automatic handgun found in Jason Miller's possession upon arrest was subjected to rigorous testing. Ballistics experts confirmed that the casings matched this weapon, providing irrefutable physical linkage between the defendant and the shots fired. Surveillance footage played a pivotal role in corroborating witness accounts and reconstructing the sequence of events. Cameras installed throughout the school captured fragmented but telling images of Jason moving with purpose through the corridors, his movements deliberate and unhesitating. The grainy visuals, though limited in clarity, depicted the calculated nature of the attack, dispelling any notion of impulsivity or confusion. Witness testimonies were gathered systematically, with detectives interviewing students, teachers, and staff who had directly or indirectly observed the incident. These narratives provided a mosaic of perspectives that, when pieced together, offered a granular understanding of Jason's actions and the ensuing chaos. Several eyewitnesses described his focused demeanor, the absence of hesitation, and the targeted firing into crowded areas. Complementing physical and testimonial evidence, investigators uncovered a manifesto authored by Jason, discovered on his personal electronic devices and in handwritten form. This document, laden with fragmented thoughts and expressions of resentment, painted a disturbing portrait of premeditation. Analysts highlighted passages that alluded to grievances against peers in the school environment, as well as a desire to assert control through violence. Digital forensic experts delved into Jason's online presence, extracting data from social media accounts, messaging platforms, and browsing histories. This digital trail revealed a pattern of escalating hostility and fixation on previous school shootings. Posts ranged from cryptic musings to explicit threats, some directed at specific individuals. The timing of these communications suggested a gradual build-up toward the attack, reinforcing the element of planning. Interrogation sessions with Jason commenced shortly after his arrest, conducted by experienced detectives trained in juvenile interviewing. These interviews sought to elicit admissions, clarify motives, and assess the defendant's mental state. Initial responses were terse and guarded, but over time, Jason disclosed aspects of his mindset, acknowledging feelings of anger and isolation that had culminated in the shooting. The interrogation transcripts reveal moments of chilling detachment juxtaposed with rare glimpses of remorse. At one point, when questioned about the victims, Jason's voice faltered, his composure momentarily breaking. Yet, he also demonstrated calculated awareness of the consequences, indicating a level of cognitive functioning that complicated arguments for diminished responsibility. Law enforcement agencies coordinated closely with forensic psychologists who conducted evaluations to determine Jason's competency and mental health status. Their findings informed both the investigative narrative and the forthcoming legal strategies. The assessments underscored the complexity of balancing juvenile developmental factors with the need for accountability. Throughout the investigative process, evidence collection extended beyond the immediate crime scene. Officers canvassed neighboring areas, seeking additional witnesses and potential accomplices. No credible co-conspirators emerged, reinforcing the portrayal of Jason as a lone actor. Searches of his residence yielded further materials, including writings and digital files that deepened understanding of his motivations. Chain of custody protocols were rigorously maintained to preserve the integrity of physical evidence. Each item, from the firearm to the manifesto, was logged and stored under strict security measures, anticipating the evidentiary demands of trial. Forensic reports were compiled with exhaustive detail, forming the backbone of the prosecution's case. The discovery of the manifesto and social media content became pivotal in framing the shooting as a premeditated act rather than a spontaneous outburst. Prosecutors emphasized these findings in their narrative, arguing that Jason had methodically planned the attack, selecting his weapon and timing to maximize impact. Defense experts countered, suggesting that these expressions reflected a disturbed adolescent mind grappling with emotional turmoil. The role of digital forensics in the investigation marked a significant evolution in law enforcement methodologies. Specialists employed advanced techniques to recover deleted files and trace online interactions, navigating encrypted platforms and anonymized accounts. Their work illuminated the digital dimensions of Jason's psychological state, providing a contemporary lens through which to interpret his actions. Witness cooperation was facilitated by victim advocacy groups, ensuring that testimonies were collected sensitively and with support. Investigators balanced the need for comprehensive evidence with respect for the trauma experienced by those recounting their experiences. This approach aimed to maintain the credibility and emotional authenticity of the testimonies. The investigative narrative was further bolstered by expert analysis of the weapon's capabilities and the tactical implications of Jason's choices. Firearms specialists detailed the lethality of the semi-automatic handgun, the firing rate, and the potential for harm within confined school spaces. Their testimony underscored the devastating consequences of the attack. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement faced challenges common to cases of this magnitude. Managing public information, coordinating interagency efforts, and maintaining procedural rigor required sustained focus. The intensity of media scrutiny added pressure, necessitating careful communication strategies to preserve the integrity of the case. The interplay between physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and psychological insights created a multifaceted evidentiary mosaic. This synthesis was critical in constructing a coherent narrative that would withstand cross-examination and legal contestation. Investigators and prosecutors worked in tandem to ensure that each piece of evidence was contextualized within the broader framework of the shooting's chronology and motive. In the weeks following the initial investigation, forensic laboratories delivered detailed reports confirming ballistic matches and validating the authenticity of digital materials. These findings solidified the factual basis for charging Jason with multiple counts of attempted murder and related offenses, underpinning the severity of the prosecution's case. The methodical nature of the evidence collection and analysis also informed pretrial motions and discovery processes. Defense attorneys scrutinized the investigative procedures, seeking potential inconsistencies or procedural errors that might mitigate culpability. The prosecution, conversely, leveraged the comprehensive nature of the evidence to reinforce the narrative of premeditated shooting. Throughout this phase, the tension within the legal team was palpable. The juvenile defendant's fate hinged on the intricate interplay of forensic science, psychological evaluation, and testimonial credibility. Each element was dissected and debated, foreshadowing the complex courtroom dynamics to come. Moreover, the investigation's findings reverberated beyond the legal arena, influencing public discourse and policy considerations. Law enforcement's ability to harness digital forensics and integrate multidisciplinary expertise was lauded, while also prompting reflection on systemic shortcomings in identifying at-risk youth before tragedy struck. In summation, the investigation into the Westbrook High shooting exemplified a meticulous, multidimensional approach, blending traditional forensic techniques with contemporary digital analysis. The assembly of ballistic evidence, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and psychological materials coalesced into a compelling portrayal of Jason Miller's calculated actions, setting the stage for the ensuing legal battle over accountability, motive, and justice. The defense team entered the courtroom with a clear and deliberate objective: to reframe the narrative surrounding Jason Miller from a cold-blooded perpetrator to a troubled adolescent grappling with profound psychological distress. Their legal defense strategy centered on portraying Jason as a juvenile defendant whose actions, while tragic, were rooted in mental illness and environmental factors beyond his control. This approach sought not only to mitigate culpability, but also to challenge the appropriateness of imposing the death penalty on a teenager still in the throes of emotional and cognitive development. At the outset, the defense attorney delivered an opening statement that underscored the complexity of Jason's psychological profile. She painted a portrait of a boy isolated by neglect and internal turmoil, emphasizing the confluence of untreated mental health issues and adolescent developmental vulnerabilities. Her tone was measured yet compelling, inviting the jury to consider the broader context rather than focusing solely on the horrific outcomes of the shooting. Central to the defense's case was the presentation of expert testimony from clinical psychologists and psychiatrists who had conducted extensive evaluations of Jason. These specialists articulated the neurological and psychological factors that influence juvenile behavior, highlighting diminished impulse control, susceptibility to intense emotional states, and impaired decision-making capacity. They argued that Jason's mental health conditions, chiefly depression and emerging mood disorders, significantly impaired his ability to fully comprehend the ramifications of his actions. The defense narrative was further bolstered by detailed accounts of Jason's personal history, presented through testimony from family members, educators, and counselors. These witnesses corroborated the portrayal of a youth struggling with social isolation, academic difficulties, and a fractured family environment. Their testimonies revealed warning signs that, had they been addressed effectively, might have altered the tragic trajectory. Legal counsel meticulously challenged the prosecution's claims of premeditation by emphasizing the impulsivity characteristic of adolescent offenders. They contended that while Jason's manifesto and social media posts indicated distress and anger, these should be interpreted as cries for help rather than calculated plans. This argument sought to humanize the defendant, framing his writings as manifestations of a disturbed mind rather than evidence of cold calculation. Throughout the trial, the defense confronted the weight of the physical evidence, the ballistic matches, surveillance footage, and eyewitness accounts. By contextualizing these elements within the framework of diminished capacity, they acknowledged the facts of the shooting, but argued that punishment should account for the defendant's mental state and potential for rehabilitation. A significant aspect of the legal defense strategy involved contesting the application of the death penalty to a juvenile defendant. Defense attorneys referenced landmark Supreme Court rulings that prohibited capital punishment for offenders under 18, invoking principles of developmental psychology and constitutional protections. They argued that Jason's age and psychological immaturity rendered the death penalty, both legally and ethically, untenable. The defense team also scrutinized procedural aspects of the investigation and interrogation, probing for inconsistencies or violations that might undermine the prosecution's case. While these challenges were limited in scope, they served to highlight the inherent complexities of adjudicating cases involving juvenile defendants and mental health issues. In cross-examination of prosecution witnesses, the defense sought to expose gaps in the evidence and question interpretations of Jason's intent. They pressed witnesses on the reliability of eyewitness accounts, the conclusiveness of the manifesto's contents, and the potential for alternative explanations of Jason's behavior. These efforts aimed to create reasonable doubt and emphasize the multifaceted nature of the case. The defense's approach extended beyond courtroom tactics to encompass broader societal considerations. Legal counsel invoked expert opinions on the neuroplasticity of the adolescent brain, emphasizing the potential for change and rehabilitation. They argued that a life sentence with access to treatment offered a more just and humane resolution than the irrevocable finality of the death penalty. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom tension was palpable as jurors grappled with competing narratives that juxtaposed the brutal reality of the shooting with the psychological complexities of a juvenile defendant. The defense's carefully crafted argument sought to elicit empathy without excusing the severity of the crime. The defense team's presentation also included testimony from mental health professionals who detailed Jason's struggles with depression, social anxiety, and intermittent explosive disorder. Their insights underscored the challenges of diagnosing and treating such conditions in adolescence, especially within environments lacking adequate support systems. Family members who testified painted a nuanced picture of Jason's upbringing, acknowledging the shortcomings while expressing hope for his potential rehabilitation. Their statements lent emotional depth to the defense's narrative, highlighting the human dimension often overshadowed by legal abstractions. The defense attorney's closing arguments reiterated the importance of context, urging the jury to consider Jason's youth, mental health, and capacity for growth. She cautioned against allowing the desire for retribution to eclipse principles of justice and mercy, reminding the court that the defendant was still a child shaped by his circumstances. This legal defense strategy did not seek to diminish the suffering of the victims or the community, but rather to advocate for a sentencing approach informed by psychological realities and constitutional mandates. The tension between accountability and compassion was central to the defense's appeal. The defense's reliance on scientific research and expert testimony marked a sophisticated engagement with contemporary understandings of juvenile psychology. Their strategy reflected an evolving legal landscape increasingly attentive to developmental neuroscience and its implications for criminal responsibility. In sum, the defense's approach was multifaceted, combining factual acknowledgement, psychological analysis, legal precedent, and humanization of the juvenile defendant. Their efforts aimed to shift the focus from punishment alone to a more nuanced consideration of culpability, rehabilitation potential, and ethical sentencing. As the trial moved forward, the defense's legal strategy set the stage for intense deliberations over the appropriate balance between justice for the victims and recognition of the defendant's youth and mental health challenges. The courtroom became a crucible where these complex themes would be rigorously examined, with profound implications for the outcome of the death penalty deliberations. The prosecution's case unfolded with a measured but resolute intensity, underscoring the grave nature of the crime and the imperative for justice commensurate with the magnitude of harm inflicted. From the outset, the district attorney framed the shooting at Westbrook High as a calculated, premeditated act, emphasizing the deliberate choices made by Jason Miller in executing a plan that resulted in profound devastation. In opening statements, the prosecutor's tone was deliberate, invoking the somber reality faced by the victims, their families, and the community. He articulated a narrative that centered on accountability, asserting that despite the defendant's youth, the cold calculation behind the shooting demanded the harshest legal consequences. The death penalty deliberations, he contended, were not merely punitive, but a necessary affirmation of societal condemnation for acts of such magnitude. Throughout the trial, the prosecution meticulously outlined the evidence gathered during the investigation, weaving together ballistic analyses, surveillance footage, and eyewitness testimonies to construct a comprehensive and compelling chronology. Expert witnesses detailed the weapon's lethality and the targeted nature of the attack, reinforcing the portrayal of a premeditated shooting designed to maximize harm. Central to the prosecution's argument was the manifesto and digital communications uncovered during the investigation, which they presented as unequivocal proof of intent. The district attorney highlighted passages expressing resentment, planning, and a desire for notoriety, framing these as indicators of Jason's conscious decision to commit violence. This narrative sought to dispel defense claims of impulsivity or diminished capacity. Victim impact statements constituted a pivotal element of the prosecution's case. Families of those injured or killed delivered heartfelt testimonies, their voices laden with grief and anguish. These statements served to humanize the abstract legal proceedings, reminding the jury of the irreparable losses and long-term consequences borne by the victims. The emotional weight of these testimonies heightened the courtroom tension, underscoring the stakes involved in the sentencing phase. The prosecution also addressed the defense's emphasis on mental health and juvenile status, acknowledging Jason's psychological background, but asserting that it did not excuse or mitigate the deliberate harm inflicted. They contended that the evidence demonstrated clear forethought and awareness, negating claims of diminished responsibility. The district attorney argued that while mental health considerations were relevant, they must be balanced against the imperative of justice for the victims. Legal experts called to the stand articulated the constitutionality and applicability of the death penalty in this context, citing precedents that permitted capital punishment for offenses committed by juveniles in certain jurisdictions. They argued that the severity and premeditated nature of the crime justified the ultimate sentence, framing it as consistent with both legal standards and societal expectations. Throughout witness examinations, the prosecution sought to dismantle defense arguments by emphasizing Jason's methodical actions. Teachers and students testified about his behavioral changes leading up to the shooting, including withdrawal, expressed grievances, and the preparation evidenced by acquiring a firearm and drafting the manifesto. These accounts reinforced a narrative of escalating intent rather than spontaneous violence. Forensic experts detailed the ballistic evidence, explaining how shell casings, bullet trajectories, and impact points corroborated a calculated approach to the attack. Surveillance footage analysis highlighted Jason's route through the school, selecting crowded areas to inflict maximum casualties. These scientific findings were presented with clinical precision, underscoring the cold calculation behind the shooting. Digital forensic specialists testified regarding the timeline and content of Jason's online activity, demonstrating a pattern of planning and escalating hostility. The prosecution leveraged these findings to counter defense claims that the writings were mere venting or adolescent angst, portraying them instead as integral components of a premeditated act. The district attorney's closing arguments were marked by a measured but unwavering commitment to securing justice. He acknowledged the tragedy of a young life lost to violence, yet emphasized the necessity of a sentence commensurate with the crime's severity. The death penalty, he argued, was the only sentence that adequately reflected the gravity of Jason's actions and the profound suffering endured by victims and their families. The prosecution anticipated and addressed public and legal concerns regarding sentencing a juvenile to death, framing their position within a broader societal imperative to deter similar acts and uphold the sanctity of innocent lives. They posited that the community's demand for accountability was not solely retributive, but a vital component of maintaining social order and justice. Throughout the trial, courtroom tension was heightened by the stark juxtaposition of competing narratives. The defense's plea for compassion, grounded in psychological complexity and youth, contrasted with the prosecution's call for unequivocal accountability based on evidence of premeditation and harm. This dichotomy infused proceedings with a profound emotional and ethical charge. The prosecution's case was buttressed by a detailed presentation of the victim's experiences, emphasizing not only physical injuries but the lasting psychological trauma endured. Medical professionals testified about the severity of wounds, the arduous recovery processes, and the ongoing impact on survivors' lives. These accounts reinforced the argument that the consequences of Jason's actions extended far beyond the immediate incident. In cross-examination, the prosecution methodically challenged defense witnesses, probing the limits of psychological assessments and questioning interpretations of Jason's mental state. They sought to clarify distinctions between mental illness and criminal intent, asserting that the former did not absolve the latter. This strategy aimed to reinforce the narrative of deliberate choice despite psychological complexity. The prosecution also highlighted Jason's behavior post-arrest, including his initial silence and subsequent admissions, as evidence of awareness and consciousness of guilt. They argued that these factors undermined claims of diminished capacity and supported the imposition of the death penalty. Throughout the trial, the district attorney maintained a demeanor that balanced respect for the defendant's youth with a firm commitment to justice. His rhetoric was precise, avoiding sensationalism while communicating the profound seriousness of the charges and their implications. In sum, the prosecution's case was constructed as a rigorous, evidence-based argument for the death penalty, emphasizing premeditation, the severity of harm, and societal responsibility. It sought to navigate the complex terrain of juvenile justice with unwavering focus on accountability, justice for victims, and the affirmation of legal and moral standards. The courtroom tension reached its apex as the prosecution laid bare the full extent of the tragedy wrought by Jason Miller, setting the stage for the defense's rebuttal and the difficult deliberations to follow. The courtroom was heavy with unspoken weight as the proceedings shifted to the victim impact phase, a moment where the abstract contours of law and evidence gave way to raw, unfiltered human emotion. For weeks, Jason Miller had maintained a stoic demeanor, his gaze steady, his posture rigid, as the legal machinery churned through the details of the shooting. But as families of the victims took the stand to recount their irreparable losses, the fragile veneer shielding the teenager's emotions began to fracture. The first to speak was Maria Lopez, mother of one of the wounded students. Her voice quivered as she described the harrowing moments when she received the call, the frantic rush to the hospital, and the agonizing uncertainty that followed. "I kept praying for my son to survive," she said, tears brimming and spilling over, "but the scars, both seen and unseen, will never heal. Her words hung in the air, a poignant testament to the enduring impact of violence. As more family members testified, the courtroom tension intensified. Each narrative wove a tapestry of grief, loss, and shattered futures. Grandparents spoke of empty seats at holiday dinners. Siblings recounted the absence of laughter and companionship. The collective sorrow transcended individual stories, casting a somber pall over all present. Throughout these statements, Jason's composure visibly wavered. Initially, he avoided eye contact, his gaze fixed on the defense table or the floor. Yet, as the testimonies deepened in emotional gravity, his shoulders began to slump, and subtle tremors betrayed an internal struggle. A single tear traced down his cheek during a particularly heart-wrenching account, an unguarded moment of vulnerability that resonated throughout the courtroom. Legal observers noted the profound impact of this emotional breakdown. The dichotomy between the teenager's prior detachment and this sudden display of remorse added complexity to the psychological portrait being constructed. Was this an authentic expression of guilt or a calculated act within the legal theater? The question lingered, fueling debate among legal analysts and spectators alike. The defense seized upon this moment, framing Jason's tears as evidence of genuine contrition and the capacity for rehabilitation. They argued that the emotional response underscored the adolescent's psychological development and potential for change. In contrast, the prosecution remained circumspect, cautioning against equating emotional displays with absolution. Witnesses from victim advocacy organizations highlighted the therapeutic importance of impact statements, emphasizing the cathartic role they play for grieving families. Their presence also served to remind the court of the human lives irrevocably altered by the shooting, anchoring legal deliberations in lived experience. The courtroom atmosphere was charged with tension as jurors absorbed the testimonies. The weight of loss was palpable, infusing the legal process with a somber urgency. The teenager, once a distant figure behind the defendant's table, now appeared as a young man grappling with the consequences of his actions in a profoundly human way. At one point, a survivor of the shooting, a quiet but resolute young woman, addressed Jason directly. Her voice steady, she spoke of forgiveness, tempered by the enduring pain of trauma. "I want to move forward," she said, "but I carry the memories every day. Your actions changed my life forever." The courtroom fell silent, the gravity of her words resonating beyond the immediate trial. Psychologists present observed that such direct confrontations between defendants and victims could catalyze emotional processing, though they also warned of the potential for re-traumatization. The delicate balance between justice and healing permeated the proceedings. Jason's lawyer approached him quietly during a recess, offering words of comfort and reminding him of the importance of sincerity. The teenager nodded, his eyes moist, a stark contrast to his earlier stoicism. This interplay between legal counsel and client highlighted the human dimensions often obscured in courtroom formality. The victim impact statements also illuminated the broader societal ramifications of the shooting. Community members, educators, and mental health professionals testified about the ripple effects, how fear and grief had permeated schools, altered social dynamics, and strained public resources. These narratives expanded the scope of the trial beyond individual culpability to encompass collective trauma. Throughout the testimonies, the prosecution maintained a focus on justice for the victims, emphasizing that emotional expressions did not negate the necessity of an appropriate sentence. They argued that while remorse was significant, it could not erase the irreversible harm caused. The courtroom tension was further heightened by the juxtaposition of vulnerability and legal gravity. The teenager's emotional display humanized him, yet simultaneously underscored the devastating consequences of his actions. This duality complicated perceptions among jurors, legal professionals, and observers. Media coverage of the victim impact phase captured these moments with sensitivity, conveying the profound sorrow and complexity inherent in the proceedings. Public reaction was mixed, some expressing empathy for the defendant's apparent remorse, others emphasizing the need for accountability irrespective of emotional displays. The defense's psychological experts later testified about adolescent emotional development, explaining that such emotional breakdowns could reflect genuine processing of guilt and regret. They posited that Jason's tears were consistent with developmental patterns, challenging narratives that dismiss them as performative. Conversely, prosecution experts cautioned that emotional responses in court could be influenced by external pressures and legal strategy, urging caution in interpreting such displays as definitive evidence of rehabilitation potential. The victim impact statements marked a pivotal juncture in the trial, shifting the focus from abstract legal arguments to the lived realities of loss and suffering. This moment crystallized the human cost of the shooting, compelling all present to confront the profound consequences beyond the courtroom's procedural confines. As the statements concluded, the judge called for order, reminding the courtroom of the solemn responsibility entrusted to the jury. The teenager, now visibly changed by the emotional weight of the proceedings, sat quietly, his earlier detachment replaced by a somber stillness. The courtroom tension, already intense, now carried an added dimension, a poignant blending of remorse, grief, and the inexorable march toward judgment. Jason Miller's emotional breakdown during the victim impact statements would resonate throughout the remainder of the trial, influencing perceptions and underscoring the complex interplay between justice and humanity. The verdict was delivered in a courtroom charged with an almost unbearable tension, the air thick with anticipation and the weight of irrevocable consequence. Jason Miller, the juvenile defendant at the center of a case that had gripped the community and nation alike, sat motionless as the judge pronounced the sentence, death. The words echoed with finality, reverberating through the room and igniting a cascade of reactions both subdued and vehement. The sentencing outcome crystallized the profound divisions that had permeated public discourse throughout the trial. For many victims' families and community members, the decision represented a measure of justice, a somber acknowledgment of the enormity of harm inflicted, and an affirmation that such acts would not be tolerated. Javier Ramirez, father of the slain Lucas Ramirez, expressed a tempered sense of closure. No sentence can bring my son back, but this verdict tells the world that his life mattered. Yet the ruling also ignited fervent debate across societal, legal, and ethical spheres. Advocates for juvenile rights and mental health reform decried the imposition of the death penalty on a teenager, arguing that it contravened evolving standards of decency and scientific understanding of adolescent brain development. Organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform issued statements condemning the sentence as disproportionate and inhumane. legal scholars weighed in on the contentious nature of juvenile capital punishment, highlighting the case's potential to reshape jurisprudence. The defense's appeals emphasized constitutional protections and landmark rulings that challenged the death penalty's application to offenders under 18. The tension between established precedent and shifting societal values created a fraught landscape for ongoing litigation. Public opinion was markedly divided. Polls conducted in the trial's aftermath revealed a community split between those demanding the harshest possible punishment and those advocating for life imprisonment with a focus on rehabilitation. Media coverage reflected this polarization, with editorials and commentary exploring the complexities of justice, mercy, and accountability. The sentencing phase itself was marked by intense courtroom dynamics. Judges, jurors, attorneys, and observers grappled with the gravity of imposing the ultimate penalty on a juvenile defendant. The psychological weight borne by jurors was considerable as they balanced legal directives with moral quandaries. The defense team immediately signaled intentions to appeal, citing procedural errors, questions regarding the adequacy of mental health evaluations, and the constitutionality of sentencing a minor to death. Their statements underscored ongoing legal challenges and the protracted nature of capital cases involving juveniles. Victims' families exhibited a spectrum of responses. Some expressed relief and validation, while others grappled with the prospect of a lengthy appeals process, prolonging their anguish. The emotional complexity of these reactions underscored the multifaceted human impact of the sentencing. Community leaders called for dialogue and reflection in the sentencing's wake, emphasizing the need to address root causes of youth violence and enhance support systems. Initiatives focused on mental health services, school safety, and early intervention gained renewed urgency amid the contentious public debate. The trial's outcome also sparked national discourse on juvenile justice reform. Advocacy groups leveraged the case to highlight systemic shortcomings and push for legislative changes. Congressional hearings and policy forums debated the ethical implications of capital punishment for minors and explored alternatives grounded in rehabilitation. Psychological experts contributed to the dialogue, elucidating the scientific consensus on adolescent brain plasticity and the capacity for change. Their insights challenged punitive approaches, advocating for treatment-oriented responses tailored to developmental realities. The media's role in framing the sentencing was critical. Coverage balanced factual reporting with human interest stories, capturing the multifaceted nature of public sentiment. Opinion pieces wrestled with the tension between justice for victims and compassion for a juvenile defendant, reflecting broader societal struggles. Legal commentators analyzed the procedural aspects of the trial and sentencing, highlighting potential grounds for appeal and the evolving landscape of juvenile capital punishment jurisprudence. The case became a reference point for ongoing debates about the intersection of age, mental health, and criminal responsibility. In the community directly affected, the sentencing intensified emotions. Some residents rallied in support of the verdict, organizing vigils and memorials to honor victims. Others protested, advocating for reform and expressing concern about the ethics of executing a juvenile. These divergent responses illuminated the deep fissures within the community's collective conscience. Educational institutions responded with renewed commitment to prevention and support. Schools implemented enhanced mental health programs and security measures, recognizing the imperative of addressing the complex factors that contribute to youth violence. The sentencing's ripple effects extended into the legal system, prompting reviews of policies related to juvenile offenders and capital cases. Judicial bodies examined procedural safeguards and the adequacy of resources for mental health assessments, seeking to balance justice with fairness. Throughout the process, the tension between retribution and rehabilitation remained a central theme. The case highlighted the challenges inherent in adjudicating serious crimes committed by juveniles, where the lines between accountability and mercy are often blurred. Jason Miller's sentencing to death crystallized these tensions, serving as a stark reminder of the profound stakes involved in the intersection of juvenile justice and capital punishment. The ruling marked a pivotal moment, both for the individuals directly affected and for the broader societal discourse on how best to address youth violence within the framework of law and ethics. As appeals and legal challenges unfolded, the community and nation continued to grapple with the complex legacy of the case. The sentencing, while definitive in its pronouncement, opened pathways for ongoing reflection, debate, and potential reform, a testament to the enduring struggle to reconcile justice with humanity. The sentencing of Jason Miller to death reverberated far beyond the courtroom walls, casting a long and complex shadow over societal discourse, legal frameworks, and community consciousness. This case, emblematic of the fraught intersection between juvenile justice, mental health, and capital punishment, provoked a profound reflection on the challenges faced by modern society in addressing youth violence and the ethical boundaries of legal retribution. In the immediate aftermath, the community grappled with a mixture of grief, anger, and unresolved tension. The shooting had exposed vulnerabilities not only in individual lives but also within systemic structures, educational institutions, mental health services, and the criminal justice system. The collective trauma persisted, underscoring the need for comprehensive approaches to prevention and intervention. Public debates intensified, centering on the appropriateness of applying the death penalty to juvenile offenders. Advocates for reform highlighted the scientific consensus regarding adolescent brain development, emphasizing diminished impulse control, heightened emotional reactivity, and an enhanced capacity for change. These findings challenged traditional notions of culpability and punishment, calling for legal standards to evolve in tandem with psychological insights. Legislative bodies began to reconsider statutes related to juvenile sentencing, with some states moving toward prohibiting capital punishment for minors altogether. The case of Jason Miller became a touchstone in these deliberations, illustrating the moral and practical complexities inherent in such decisions. Lawmakers contended with balancing public safety, victims' rights, and the potential for rehabilitation. Mental health professionals advocated for expanded resources and early intervention programs, stressing that identifying and supporting at-risk youth could prevent tragedies before they occur. Schools and community organizations sought to implement comprehensive mental health curricula and counseling services, aiming to address underlying issues of isolation, trauma, and behavioral disorders. The legal community faced ongoing challenges as appeals and constitutional questions surrounding the case unfolded. Courts grappled with precedent, evolving standards of decency, and the tension between juvenile protections and accountability. The case fueled scholarly discourse on juvenile justice, contributing to a growing body of literature exploring developmentally informed legal practices. Media coverage continued to shape public perception, with narratives oscillating between calls for justice and appeals for compassion. Documentaries, opinion pieces, and investigative reports delved into the multifaceted dimensions of the case, fostering a broader understanding of the societal factors at play and humanizing those involved. Survivors and victims' families remained central figures in the ongoing conversation, their voices advocating for both remembrance and reform. Many channeled their grief into activism, promoting initiatives focused on gun control, mental health awareness, and school safety. Their efforts underscored the enduring human cost of such violence and the imperative to prevent recurrence. Educational institutions incorporated lessons from the tragedy into curricula and policies, emphasizing conflict resolution, empathy training, and crisis preparedness. These measures aim to cultivate environments where students felt supported and where warning signs could be effectively addressed. The case also prompted introspection within law enforcement and emergency response agencies. Training protocols were revised to enhance readiness and sensitivity when dealing with youth-related incidents. Collaborative approaches between police, schools, and mental health providers were strengthened to foster early identification and intervention. On a societal level, the Jason Miller case highlighted persistent challenges in reconciling the demands of justice with the complexities of adolescent development. It underscored the limitations of punitive approaches in addressing the root causes of youth violence and the necessity of integrated strategies encompassing prevention, treatment, and community engagement. The legacy of the case continues to influence discussions on juvenile justice reform, serving as a catalyst for policy changes and a reminder of the profound consequences borne by individuals, families, and communities. It calls upon society to confront uncomfortable truths about neglect, mental health stigma, and systemic failures. As the legal process advances through appeals and potential legislative adjustments, the case remains a focal point for debates on morality, law, and human rights. It challenges policymakers, practitioners, and citizens alike to envision a justice system that balances accountability with compassion, recognizing the unique vulnerabilities and capacities of youth. In this ongoing narrative, the community's resilience and commitment to healing stand as testaments to the human spirit's capacity to confront tragedy and strive for a more just and humane future. The Jason Miller case, tragic in its origins, continues to shape the evolving discourse on how society addresses the intersection of juvenile crime, mental health, and capital punishment, leaving an indelible imprint on the collective conscience.